So, concerning Buddhism, which we kind of found our way to, or investigating, in a way, Buddhism is concerned with the principal questions that human beings have always been concerned with, I suppose, which are, what must I do to be happy? What are the sources of happiness? What is the way to become free from suffering? And these are the age-old simple questions of being alive, really, that confront us in being alive. And Buddhism really is concerned with this. Those are the questions that Buddha asked himself, it seems, that prompted him to set out on his own kind of journey, spiritual discovery. And in a way they prompted us to at least make some kind of investigation of Buddhism, and perhaps even commit ourselves to its practice. Of course, there are many recipes or many potential answers to these questions, these fundamental human questions, on offer today, as they always have been. For some, of course, the answer to these questions is to be found in changing the external world by various means, whether technological means for transforming the kind of surroundings, and perhaps even transforming human beings, political action to transform social arrangements, and so on and so forth. And they're on offer, very strongly on offer, in fact, in the modern world. And then other things that we might consider as a way to answer these questions, of course, are found in philosophies and religions, which, of course, in comparison to, say, the answers from technology and politics, suggest there's an inner dimension to human life which cannot be kind of satisfactorily explained, satisfactorily dealt with merely by physical means, whether political or scientific or technical. All religions, most philosophies, agree with that. But of course, then we find that there are differences within those things, as we've seen for ourselves, that generally most religions suggest that the means to happiness is to develop a relationship with an external being, with a God, perhaps the Creator God Himself, and that by that means that we will find a way to, salvation, to freedom, in some way, to eternal life, and so on and so forth. But of course, Buddhism doesn't see it quite that way either, because Buddhism sees that, in fact, the source of happiness and suffering is actually the mind. The mind is, in the sense of not just the intellectual aspect of mind, but the emotional aspect of mind. So for Buddhism, it is this which is really where we need to place our attention, that it is only in the mind or the heart that you can really unravel the causes of suffering. Because no matter how we change the external world, we still find that we're oppressed by various kinds of sufferings. No matter what physical changes we make, we still find we're oppressed by dissatisfaction, disappointment, disillusion, and suffering. And of course, also by that kind of a graphic illustration of suffering, which is impermanence, old age, and death. So for Buddhism, it is really the mind that is the king of creators. If we're looking for a creator for Buddhism, it's the mind, which is the creator of suffering and happiness. That the mind right now, as Buddha pointed out, the mind of all beings is kind of fundamentally pure, primordially in its natural state. It has the capacity for wisdom and compassion, which are the true roots of happiness. But from beginningless time, we've been acting in ignorance of that fundamental nature of our mind, and perpetuated a mistaken understanding of the world and of who we are. And this fiction that we're propagating from day to day, from moment to moment, about the nature of ourselves and the world, that is the real cause of suffering. Because we're contending with the actual nature of the world. We are living in a fantasy, but the reality is not changed by our fantasy. Reality is the same as it's always been. Things arise, things pass away. The world is not under our control. It is not something subject to our desires or our hatreds. The world is what it is. And we are fighting with it due to our misperception of our nature and of the nature of the world. So that this requires not some... To put this right, to put the cause of suffering right in us, the cause of suffering which are our misperceptions, our ignorance, and the disturbing emotions of hatred and desire and so on that arise from that, to put all that right, it can't be done by external means, by changing the external world, or by changing the physical arrangement of things. It has to be something that occurs in our heart. And that is what Lord Buddha points to when he says that it is mind that is the source of happiness and suffering. And in fact, as he put it, actually everybody is already in a way endowed with the capacity to awaken, to be a being of limitless compassion and wisdom, as exemplified by him and other enlightened beings. It's already present, but it needs uncovering. It's as if our fundamental nature, our primordial pure nature, our Buddha nature, to use that term, is encrusted by lifetimes of negativity, lifetimes of disturbing emotions, of ignorance, of karmic actions. So it's like a completely encrusted jewel which nobody can see, but it is present, nevertheless, and has not been diminished or tarnished in any way by the surrounding incrustations. That is what Buddha means when he says that you have the Buddha nature, or again, as we could say, all beings are actually already in a way Buddhas, but they just simply do not know it. So the path of Buddhism, all the fantastically rich teachings of Buddhism on ethics, on meditation, on philosophy, and the kind of things that supplement these fundamental aspects of the path, like ritual and art and all the rest, really all come down to that, just the means of stripping the incrustations of our bad habits, bad emotional habits, ignorance and so on, away from the jewel of our Buddha nature mind. So in that sense, Buddhism is extraordinarily simple. It is just that. Recognizing that everything we need is already present and uncovering it. Why then are the teachings of the Buddha extraordinarily rich, one might even say sometimes very intimidatingly rich and varied, if what is necessary, what we need, is already present within each of us? And the answer for that is that it's the incrustation that covers our Buddha nature. Each incrustation is somewhat different. We have accumulated different kind of habits along the along the way. We have different strengths and different weaknesses. Our disturbing emotions have particular configurations. For some people, hatred is the strongest disturbing emotion. For others, it's greed. For others, again, it's jealousy, and so on and so forth. So, although the matter at hand, the real matter, is extraordinarily simple, and one might say almost universal, the Buddha nature is not better in anybody than anybody else, it's the Buddha nature, what surrounds it is different. And hence, Buddha presented his teachings so that beings could approach it from whatever their particular starting point was, their starting point, which is none other than the incrustations. In a way, you see, what prompts us to seek out Dharma is the fact that we find there's something out of alignment in our lives. It's our habits, it's our disturbing emotions. In fact, in a peculiar and ironically wonderful way, it's our neurosis that makes us seek wisdom. We are discontent. We become discontented. Things are out of alignment. Things don't quite fit. Our attitude to the world is so rigid, is so tight that it produces unease and discomfort, suffering. So that's what we start from, and everybody's mix of disturbing emotions and suffering is somewhat different, and that's why Buddha, with his kind of extraordinary flexibility, presented the teachings in many, many different kinds of ways to meet where so many different types of people were coming from. And then when you add to that the difference from, occasioned by geography and culture and history, then we see that although the matter of Dharma, the kind of core matter, is extraordinarily simple, the means to get to it, to uncover it, to free it, have to be various, because everybody's as a karmic mix is somewhat different. Sure, there are commonalities, as I indicated. Some people are more driven by aggression, some more by desire, and so on and so forth. That's true. And some people's kind of philosophical misconceptions are more towards eternalism, as we put it in Buddhism, and others towards nihilism. So all these kind of exist, but these commonalities exist, these groupings among beings, potential practitioners exist. So Buddha presented the teachings in we say really he presented 84,000 different teachings. I mean, of course, it's a suspiciously round number, but it indicates it's the kind of the flexibility and the variety of ways of presenting the Dharma. And each of those 84,000 different teachings is like a door to liberation, a door going from our present state of confusion, frustration, disappointment, disillusion, and again. But now there's a door from that world, from samsaric world, from our fictional world, to the real, to the true, to the ultimate reality, which is none other than the timeless, unborn, unceasing nature of mind itself, which when it recognized, there is complete bliss, because all causes of suffering, of dissatisfaction, have come to an end, since the fiction that underlies them has been cut through. The fiction of here is the self and there is the other. Because it's that fundamental split that we make in the world to affirm this illusory self by distinguishing it from the illusory other that is the source of all our disturbing emotions, all karma, and hence all suffering. And when we recognize that such a split is a fiction, when we recognize the true nature of reality, the true nature of mind, then all the things that have produced suffering are themselves dissolved, and there is complete liberation from suffering, complete full fulfillment. Yet this path to discover our Buddha nature and therefore to discover the true source of happiness, we should realize pretty quickly, if not immediately, that the happiness we're talking about can't be a happiness that is just a private happiness. Can't be a happiness that just is something we seek for ourselves alone. Because I'm one being among countless beings. And in fact, my very existence as this one being is dependent on and contingent upon all the other beings. Most dramatically, obviously, most evidently in this life upon my parents and family, but finally, in a way, on the whole family of sentient beings. My existence is part of that network of beings, of embodied beings, of living beings. So I cannot actually journey towards the source of happiness without considering other beings. So my search for the causes to uncover and dissolve the causes of suffering must be one that I undertake for all, and not for myself alone. Because a journey undertaken for the sake of self alone isn't actually going to dissolve the fiction of self. It's just going to, in a sort of way, reinforce it. So that's pretty clear from the get-go in Dharma. The journey to liberation must be one that is motivated by compassion for others, not simply by distress at one's own individual suffering. But it must be one that encompasses the needs of others. And in doing so, of course, we'll be emulating the example of the Buddha, who as the stories say, was first motivated to set out on the path by confronting the awful suffering experienced by another. That his response to that awful suffering being inflicted on another being, as it were, awoke his natural potential for enlightenment through kindness, through compassion, through putting aside his own self-interest and taking on the needs of another. So, again, from the get-go in Dharma, we must be clear about that we're in the business of happiness, yes, but it is not a happiness of my own self-content, privileging myself and my own needs, escaping to some kind of private nirvana. It is the happiness of all that we're concerned with. And, of course, that happiness is not the happiness of kind of forgetfulness that you get from kind of temporary pleasures, temporary physical pleasures, or so on and so forth. It is a happiness that is not based upon such temporary causes, but upon the fulfillment of one's potential and helping other beings to fulfill their potential for Buddhahood. So, although we can say Buddhism is about happiness, it's a happiness that is contingent on wisdom and compassion, not on mere escapism, or not on mere, for instance, in the practice of meditation. We practice meditation because that is a vital part of uncovering the Buddha nature. But the purpose of meditation is not to tranquilize ourselves to the temporary difficulties of life, but in fact to create a basis for uncovering the true nature of mind. So again, we say Buddhism is about happiness, but it is not about the happiness of some kind of industry of spreading kind of temporary tranquilization by some kind of purloined meditation techniques. Happiness and true happiness can only exist in the presence of authentic wisdom and compassion. So it is nothing to do with the kind of the happiness promoted by a kind of consumer society or whatever that we see so much nowadays. I just want to make that clear, because sometimes, by saying Buddhism is about happiness, one runs the risk of turning Buddhism into something very trivial and very banal. But the happiness that Lord Buddha is talking about is this happiness, the happiness of working for the liberation of all beings, and in that way dissolving your sense of your egotism, your self-clinging, which is the cause of real suffering. So that is, in a way, how we, I think, should kind of understand the Dhamma. Of course, we grow towards this. It's not that there's there's a demand that you must have understood and signed on to the whole of Dharma before you can even make any beginnings. We have to make our first steps in Dharma often, well, almost always, of course, knowing some things and not knowing others, knowing that the initial steps make sense, and we can use those, and the deeper, more profound stuff that we might know is there, or we might have heard is there, or might guess is there, we'll get to that and deal with it in due course. Because that's another thing. Because the incrustation is so thick, it's many layers, and we have to work through it, most of us, gradually, uncovering one knot, one neurosis, one problem at a time, and then the next one comes up, and we free ourselves from that. So this is why Buddhism is graduated. It's a step-by-step thing, even though the ultimate matter, the Buddha nature, is there, and if we had extraordinarily great circumstances, we could perhaps realize it all at once. And that would be it. The path would be over. But for most of us, the path is a step-by-step, day-by-day, whole life, perhaps more than one life, affair in uncovering this extraordinary jewel. So that's what I want to say, that, in a way, we should get an overview of the Dhamma, what it's for, but then realize, well, yes, but I'm just a kind of, I need to start here and now in my everyday life, in my circumstances, and just get it going, and hear the Dhamma, think about the Dhamma, meditate, hear, think, meditate, in other words, beginning as in the simplest way, and gradually, this kind of wisdom and kindness and compassion, the qualities of the path, will grow in me. It's very important, I think, for us as newcomers to Dhamma, so to speak, to realize that we don't need to become extraordinary. We don't need to, how to put it, we don't need some big kind of dramatic thing, running off to the caves or anything like that. That would be, in a way, probably a kind of fantasy version of the spiritual path. Much better to practice the Dhamma in the circumstances of our life. For most of us, that is the case. That as a mother, a father, a child, a worker, whatever it is, it's probably right there in that kind of life, as long as we can create enough time for study and practice, that the Dhamma will work most effectively for us. We don't need to run away from that, hoping that if we run to some idealized kind of spiritual world, we'll be able to make progress. Actually, we'll have delayed our progress most often by doing that, because the circumstances of our life provide us enough material for developing kindness, for developing concern and compassion to others, for developing patience, and so on. All these are extraordinarily important qualities that we'll need for the path. And if we approach our ordinary life in the proper way, with attentiveness and respect to it, and the people in it, then the Dhamma qualities that we're trying to grow and we're reading about and thinking about, I think will really grow. Whereas if we think we have to, as I say, rush off to some exotic location and so on and so forth, we're putting off the real encounter with what matters, which is this, the heart. Here is where the real work will be done. And everyday life and our network of relationships provides enough stimulus to open this heart, if as I say, we're respectful and attentive to the contours of everyday life. So there's just a few things. I mean, there's so many things one could say, but perhaps that's enough for a beautiful Sunday morning. So if there are any questions, and if there aren't any questions, perhaps there have been some prepared earlier. Or maybe Mrs. Spacely Trellis from North Wales will phone one in, perhaps.
Yeah, I'll phone one in.
So the question.
I've got a question.
Yeah, sure.
If, how can you achieve happiness if the people around you are suffering?
Well, that your happiness is not going to be a happiness that is found by escaping and ignoring their suffering. It's going to come, of course, in actually forgetting yourself in working for them. I don't mean forget yourself like being a slave, of course, because a slave actually cooperates with the oppressor in creating more suffering for both of you, you and the oppressor. So it's not that kind of forgetfulness. But being as it's the root of our suffering as this tremendous tightness we have about ourselves, this tremendous grasping at the notion of self, as being as that is the cause of suffering, the more we pay attention to others and look to their interests, the more that tightness starts to slacken, starts to loosen. So although the encounter with others, especially when they're suffering or in difficulty, is challenging, is stretching, it's stretching that tightness and relaxing it. So in fact we will find true joy in that. We need some courage, of course, initially to be able to do that. And that's why being a practice, cultivating your heart, having some time for practice, cultivating kind of stillness and openness in your heart, and then going back to work with the people, then come back to practice, then going to work with people. That's how it should work. So one needs to care for oneself. Actually, I hate that phrase. It's so narcissistic, isn't it? But you need to care for your heart when you're working for others. But truly the source of happiness is in working for others. Because as I say, it's the best dissolver of your suffering, causes of your suffering, which is none other than self-centeredness.
Even if you can't relieve their suffering?
You see, we learn to bear suffering. What is it that says we can't bear suffering? Who's that? Who are we concerned with there? To be brutally honest, we're concerned with us when we say that. So it's not really, that's not a mark of compassion, that's a mark of self-protectiveness. Now, for instance, when we talk about the meditation on compassion in Buddhism, we almost always preface it with the necessity for meditating love first, because love is concerned with the happiness of others. You concentrate on them and bringing happiness to them. Why? Why not straight to compassion? Because for most people, the encounter with the bare facts of suffering, unless they've got a kind of positivity in themselves, a kind of sense of happiness already, it can be quite difficult. It can even make them kind of recoil and even become aggressive to the people who are suffering because they can't bear it. So that's why I said we need to take care of our heart and approach this gently. But finally, there is no other cause of real happiness than working for others. But like I say, we have to approach that we have to be thoughtful about this, which again shows we need always wisdom as well as the positive virtues. We need a measure of wisdom. Yes.
Does Dharma share common ground with artistic processes? So in a wider sense, such as like music or film or poetry, in that it appears to be a creative process?
Well, there is some overlap. There could be some overlaps. We could say, but it would be tendentious to identify in any particular music or art form and say, oh, that's Buddhist, and we claim that, because that's dubious, I think, to do that. But to put it in a very Buddhological way, it said that the Buddha can even, being as the Buddha's, if you were, primary work is to connect people with the path. It said that Buddha can even sometimes manifest as art or manifest as an artist, because the art that creates beauty in a way raises people up, raises people's vision up. That's not enlightenment, but it can in some way broaden people, raise their consciousness, raise their vision, so they start to then attend to the world in a new and fresh way. So, without elaborating an aesthetic theory, I don't want to go down there too much, we could say that art can be supplementary to Dharma, and that very fact it can is shown by that theory that Buddha could even appear as an artist or as a piece of art. Now, we probably shouldn't go too far down, because then people start asking, well, identify some such enlightened art, and that's far too complex. But what does it mean for us? I think it means that, well, actually, Buddhist cultures, wherever they've gone, have stimulated kind of artistic productions, whether it's visual art, particularly in China and Japan, whether it's drama, as in Southeast Asia, a lot of which was based on Buddhist themes, and so on. And so it seems that Buddhism works well in a cultural medium where there's beautiful art. It seems to support the Dharma. Now, does that mean that all Buddhists should then embrace art? No, it's up to individuals. But it's interesting and important, I think, that Buddhism has this positive relationship with the art, with beautiful art. But it will differ. If there's Buddhist-inspired art that develops in the West, it will have different kind of aesthetic quality, resonances maybe than in China and Japan. It hasn't happened yet. It may happen in the future.
So could we say Dharma is a creative process, just in itself, maybe not compared to other...
I'm not really sure how you're defining... I mean...
Yeah, it's quite a corporate word sometimes.
Yeah, creative process. Well, there is something to point to there, of course, which is where we can make a distinction. In some ways, Western art is very much driven by the idea of originality and the new, make it new, as Ezra Pound said, come up with something new. That's not a very Dharma value, because it's like, in terms of enlightenment, nobody can improve on the enlightenment of the Buddhas, because they recognize the true nature of reality, which is unborn and unceasing. So in Buddhism, art has a value in as much as it's a gateway beyond itself to the transcendent realm, beyond birth and death. Whereas a strong imperative in much Western art, particularly since the Renaissance, he said, pretending he had a knowledge of art history, is driven by the idea of originality and newness, and so there's some interesting, thought for drawing a distinction, or drawing, a distinction between much modern art process and therefore creative. You see, because creative is almost like suggests you've got to come up with the newest thing. Something that's never been done, something that's never been said before. And that's very definitely not a kind of Buddhist value, really.
You were saying that you explained that the incrustations are kind of particular to each of us.
Yeah.
But it seems that the sort of ingredients of the incrustations are kind of recognised within the Buddha's teaching, in the sense that we can sort of we can see a recognition reflected back from the teachings of the ingredients of our incrustations.
Yeah, the disturbing emotions.
So it seems that the sort of the mix of ingredients, or the ingredients in the mix, don't seem to be kind of new.
No, that's true, and that is something like when people say, "Oh well, the Dharma needs to be changed for the modern world." I think one must be very cautious about that. Dharma does, the cultural outer presentation of Dharma has changed, of course, in different according to geography and history. But the actual real matter, the Buddha nature mind, that never changes. And the ingredients in the incrustations, as you rightly point out, never change. It's the same basic disturbing emotions as it always has been. Greed, hatred and delusion rule our heart and rule the world. They did 2,500 years ago, and probably 30,000 years ago, and they will in 10,000 years, unless everybody's become enlightened by them, which is unlikely. So that's why we should be very cautious about suggestions that the Dharma needs to be modernized, because in our heart we're not modern. We have computers and cocaine, but which was not present in ancient Babylon as far as we know, but otherwise no change. So there's no need for, in the real serious matter of Dharma, there's no need for anything new.
It just seems it gets mixed up differently continuously.
Yeah, but as we've had since beginningless time for that mix-up, we've had all the mixes known to Jamie Oliver and beyond.
I'm going to ask a question, Lama Jampa, on behalf of perhaps some newer people to Dharma. What would you say is the most important thing to focus on for someone who's interested in developing their understanding of the Buddha's teachings? We've talked about daily life being a place where we can put it all into practice, but out of meditation and listening to teachings and reflecting, where should we really focus to start with?
Well, I mean, actually, in a way, you've just indicated that how we develop our encounter with Dharma, how we learn the Dharma, so to speak, learn its skills through hearing and then reflecting and meditating, and then as to where we should place our attention to see whether the Dharma is working in us, I think for almost all of us, the thing will be, how am I relating to this person now? And as the real key to whether the Dharma's there, the value of the Dharma is there with us in that moment, is how am I related to this person, who I'm with, or who is asking me a question, or who wants something from me, or is just walking across the road with me, or is just coming to me from across the road. It's always in that circumstance of life that we can see. Now, of course, when we see that, we'll see that sometimes we're attentive to them and sometimes we're forgetful. Sometimes we're annoyed by them. Sometimes we find that we can be kind to them. It will change from day to day and from encounter to encounter. But in a way, that is the mark of how much the Dharma is working in us. Because as I was saying, the Dharma really works by softening this, the heart. Basically, our heart is really tense and tight and rigid, and has been, out of our fearfulness and all the rest of it that we've been carrying with us for so long. And so that is where we will start to see the real important changes. I say that because sometimes people think that I'm progressing the Dharma if I can sit cross-legged for half an hour. Well, it's important to do that, it's good. But you could do that and still be not changed. Or you could have understood some important doctrine of the Dharma, but you could still not be changed, and you not be practicing. So in other words, you're not moving. The Dharma's not working in you. So, if you like, for the measurement of Dharma, whether your Dharma is working or not, look every day to your heart and how you are in the encounter with others, because it's the good heart, as the teacher calls it, which is the real evidence of Dharma. But then, how are we to? What should we focus on in terms of engaging with the Dharma? I think we should. The Dharma is studying the Dharma, practicing the Dharma. In a way, it needs a double dimension. One is the acquiring the teachings, and the other is doing the meditation practice. Now, of course, in many Buddhist countries, many Buddhists don't do this. They are they not Buddhists? Yes, they are, because they're still trying to cultivate good-heartedness, and they're observing the Dharma, the precepts, the moral teachings of the Dharma, which create the necessary space for that. And that's a very important thing to remind ourselves of, that the moral precepts of the Dharma form one of the three trainings that the Buddha said we all need: ethics, meditation, and wisdom. But we'll learn about those through hearing the explanations, hearing teachings. So what I want to say is that what you should be doing if Dhamma is going to work for you, you need to develop the habit of teachings that you've heard. You make your own. You digest them, and that is done by this critical process of reflecting on the teachings, as we have in that saying, hear, think and meditate. The thinking process is where, having heard some teaching or read a book, you take it to pieces, you examine it critically with your common sense, your reasoning. You see how it works. You test, is this really saying something that is true in terms of the way the world works, or how suffering arises and so on. So you really have to. There's no shortcut. There's no way to avoid this. You have to make the Dharma yours by this process of reflection. So this is not an all-at-once thing, like you do it and then you've signed off on the whole of Dharma. We do it continuously. So your approach to teaching should be, it's not just I was there and somebody said something vaguely inspiring, or I'll read this book for a bit of temporary inspiration, but it's more like, this is a manual and I need to master it. And to master it, I need to take it to pieces to see what it really means and how it really works. So your study program, in a way, should be, you should have a study program. It may be no more than 10 or 15 minutes a day, maybe half an hour if you've got lots and lots of time. But try to get a habit of short study over teachings you've heard. So you may do no more than read a paragraph. Read the paragraph, close the book, and then, as it were, teach it back to yourself, asking yourself, what does it mean? How do I know this is true? And finally summarize the points for yourself. So in that way, the Dharma is transferred from the teachers to you. It becomes your Dharma because you've digested it in this proper way. So that's one track. And the other track is the meditation practice, the principal means of travelling. The teachings are the map book, of course. The meditation is the way of travelling, the way of moving. So once again, you need a regular discipline, a regular routine. This heart that needs softening, as I've described, it needs softening on a daily basis until the knots are completely relaxed, really we're liberated from them. And so that means if you just meditate from time to time, when, so to speak, the inspiration strikes you, it doesn't really happen. You have an extraordinary experience every now and then, but the knots remain in place. Whereas daily practice, even if it's relatively short, as it should be for beginners, by the way, even if it's relatively short, the work is there. And what's more, the effect of the meditation then can be felt in everyday life. It comes out from your meditation into your everyday life. So for a beginner, I don't want to be too prescriptive about the amount of time, but to really get a good, strong start, make a study and meditation program for yourself, which can run on throughout the days. If one of those should go, you can only do one rather than two. Meditation is one to keep, of course. But best would be to be able to do a little bit of meditation, a little bit of study every day. Then the Dhamma will arise in you rather than being something you simply are inspired by every time you see a book or meet a Buddhist person or go to a Buddhist centre. The real Buddhist centre is in you. Should be in you, in your life, in your heart. We need the external centre, of course, for ourselves and to make a door for Dhamma for others. But the real site of the Dhamma, the real place of Dhamma happens, is in our own individual life. And that's why we need to be, as it were, connecting with the essence of the Dhamma every day. And that we do most strongly by sitting on a cushion and by a little bit of study of the Buddha's teachings.
Can I ask about this notion of provisional truth that we heard about
Yes.
yesterday?
Well, I want to distinguish, to be really not pedantic, but very, very specific. There's two things that are related but not absolutely identical. There's the two categories of truth, ultimate and conventional truth, and that is about how we experience the world. And then in terms of the Buddha's teachings, we discriminate between statements which are direct and which are descriptions of things that do not need qualification, that are statements of that's how it is, and other statements, provisional statements, which are statements which are effective for a certain person or a certain audience, but eventually that framework in which they were couched will have to be discarded because it's not actually in accord with ultimate truth. So they're related, but they're slightly, one is about reality, and the other is about the teachings, the scriptures, and how they must be interpreted. But as for the distinction between ultimate and conventional truth, yes, it's like this, that there are two ways of seeing the world. One way is when we do not examine the nature of what we perceive. We simply take it for granted that what we perceive is real, that the contents of our perception, the appearances, are truly existent. That's conventional truth. Now, within conventional truth, there's also a distinction between conventional truth which is valid up to a point, and conventional truth which is completely fictional. So that, for instance, if we take a car, for instance, the example of a car, it would have been a chariot, of course, in ancient India. If we take a car, if we imagine there is some irreducible essence called car, and we think this appearance is merely a manifestation of this essence, car, when we examine the car, the appearance, we don't find such an essence. We find merely there's an assembly of parts in a particular configuration. However, when we sit in that configuration of parts, even though there's no real essence to it called car, it can work, it will convey us from one place to another. So this is a conventional truth, but it's valid in the sense that it works. So one way of distinguishing a valid conventional truth from a completely fictional one is whether it works or not. So it's a conventional truth that this assembly of metal parts and electronics and blah blah blah, many things I don't even know about, is a car. It's not a valid conventional truth that it's a banana, because I cannot eat it. But so if I think of it as a banana, that's a total mistaken idea. Think of it as a car is valid as far as it goes. So it's a conventional truth. The ultimate truth is there is no essence to it, no abiding carness. The car is a dependent phenomena, manifesting through the assembly of parts. So that is, roughly speaking, how we distinguish a conventional from an ultimate truth. You can see that, of course, for Buddhism, there are no things, or for Madhyamaka, at least the most subtle of philosophical schools, there are no phenomena with any abiding nature, with any intrinsic nature, because everything is dependent, and that is how we understand ultimate truth.
Is therefore everything in the Dharma a conventional truth except emptiness?
Yes. So the Dhamma itself is a conventional truth, but it's a conventional truth that points towards emptiness, rather like that analogy of a finger pointing to the moon. It's not the moon, but it's pointing. If we follow the direction, we will, as it were, step in the right way towards the moon. So everything in the Dhamma is but you see then Dhamma statements, still we can distinguish between provisional Dhamma statements and definitive ones. So a definitive Dhamma statement is one that, even though it's couched, of course, in concepts, and therefore is in itself a conventional truth, is pointing you beyond the concepts towards that which is non-conceptual, emptiness. Whereas a provisional statement would be something like this, where Buddha said, when he said to his disciples at the end of his life, when they're moaning about what they're going to do in the future without him, he said, you should strive on by yourselves. Now, he used the word self, and of course, actually, we do not believe that there is any intrinsically existent self. Buddha wasn't committing himself, wasn't suggesting there was, but it was just in that framework, he had to say, stop relying on me, you don't need me, you get on with it. So it's just, that's a provisional statement. The self there is quite clearly just, he's working within their framework to give them some assistance. It's not a definitive statement. Buddha didn't suddenly, after 45 years of saying there's no true self, suddenly smuggle it in the last half hour of his life. And I mean, there's plenty of there's many other examples where Buddha uses concepts and idioms that are meaningful to that audience, but we're not to take them as being statements of real fact.
Lama,
Yeah.
more of a general question. Do you think that religious faith has been really lost in industrial society, or do you think it's just transformed into some other form?
Yes, a perennial debate in religion and theology academic departments. But of course, the soft answer is to say it all depends what you mean by religion. Now, so we could talk about that for a couple of hours, but I think that well, first of all, there have always been a variety of worldviews. Using ancient India as a standpoint, in Buddha's time, Buddha himself encountered people with different worldviews, ranging from theistic to materialistic. So that's important to know, because sometimes religious people think that the existence of materialism is a particularly modern phenomenon. The existence of materialism and the seeming rejection of religion is a totally modern phenomenon. Well, it's not, of course. There's always been such things. And of course also we sit oddly to this question because Buddhism is non-theistic. So if one meant the decline in theism, from a Buddhist point of view, that's not really... Theism is as daft as materialism, to put it very brutally, from a Buddhist point of view. But then talk about more generally. Again, you could say that a lot of the emotion that goes into religion, particularly theistic religion, that emotion has not gone away. It simply found different forms of expression. And then if one acknowledges that or believes that, then one would then start, I think, to point to other versions of kind of total explanation systems, which claim the same kind of totality, universal explanation as, say, Christianity has done, and offer similar kind of ideas, like there's a meaning in history, which we Buddhists don't believe, of course. There's a meaning in history, there's a movement in history, there's an end point to history, there's a glorious kind of future up ahead. You can see where I'm going with this. That the political ideologies in the West have derived much of their energy from Christianity, and in some ways, of course, are merely a kind of disguised heretical form of Christianity. So one might say, therefore, that the religious emotion is just finding different expressions. That's all.
I have a question.
Sure.
If we go through personal struggles such as health problems or something, we
Yes.
sometimes start focusing very much on ourselves and
Yes.
how we want our own suffering to end.
Yes.
How can we get out of this mind frame to start thinking about other beings as well, rather than just focusing on ourselves?
Well, I think that it requires a certain willingness to be brave, and but it's not a very big one. It's not a very big jump one needs to make. But I think one needs to do it in this way, that perhaps for us, that we're not ready to, as it were, embrace the suffering of all beings, but nevertheless, but our illness grants us a certain kind of kinship with other people who have that particular kind of illness or problem. So perhaps the way to train, and of course this is part of the sending and taking teaching in Buddhism, perhaps the way to train is when one is feeling bogged down and oppressed by one's particular suffering, to just call to mind all those others who have that particular type of suffering. That, because you're kin with them, you have a shared, you share something, your family. That will, I think, reduce the emotional pain of the suffering, because one of the terrible things about suffering is the way we're locked in by it. We're imprisoned in this kind of misery of our own body and our own body's responses to something. So in this way, we bring a little light and a little space into our own experience, precisely to the measure to go back to Penny's first question, right? We bring a little light and ease into our own situation, precisely to the same extent that we can think of others. So it's like inspirational, and perhaps having trained in that way for a bit, we can be even more inclusive. So but in Buddhism we always try to practice in a very pragmatic way, like small steps rather than grand statements. The grand statement would be, I've got this oppression, so all their sufferings come into mind. Wonderful if one could do it, but most of us are are still narrow, tight, neurotic people. So we have to begin where we're at. And so just that is the first step, I think. Everybody who's got the same suffering as mine coming to, may I absorb it. Of course, I should point out that this, one might think, oh, therefore I'm going to double my own pain. Actually, it never works like that. Because the emotional pain one feels is always due to self-clinging. Whereas in this forgetfulness that you experience when you think for a moment of others' suffering, that cause of pain in you is not operative. The self-clinging cause, I mean. So, paradoxically, this bravery leads just to increase of happiness, not to doubling suffering.
Lama, I've heard quite a lot about, well, in the group sometimes when we're talking about, the metaphor of uncovering Buddha nature, then, a lot of the time people equate that to things that they've heard, like connecting with the higher self or being in alignment with the universe or universal energy.
Yeah.
Could you say, it's like this, would you say that they are the same thing, or?
Not really, because that's why, the teaching on Buddha nature is given to encourage people to understand that they can achieve enlightenment. But the teaching on Buddha nature must also be accompanied by a thorough negation, the negation of the incrustation. Higher selves, lower selves, medium-sized selves, big, small, fat, round, cosmic selves, intellectual selves, physical selves, they're all the incrustation. As long as we cling to self, there's a distinction between self and other. Even to cling to the higher self, there's a higher self, then what's the others? Other higher selves, then lower selves. So the Buddha nature is not a self. We cannot grasp it and identify with that as this is me, because whenever this is a me, that's other. So no, the Buddha nature teaching must definitely not be confused with any teaching of self or a God or even a universal energy, because a universal energy is something that again you can cling to, you can objectify. Of course, one should always ask. Sometimes people use these phrases, and they're not really, in a way, fully worked out what they mean by them. So they're groping in. I'll put it this way: they're groping in the right direction, and so one shouldn't be too harsh or judgmental about it. So that's why it's very important to ask always, well, what do they really mean by that statement? Sometimes it turns out that actually they do mean non-self, they do mean emptiness, but they just, their use of words is not very sharp, and they don't realise that there's lots of kind of errors that could creep in if they hold to this terminology. But no, Buddha nature teaching must always be presented in the context of non-self and of emptiness.
I've just been wondering about, picked up on something you said earlier about it's much better to, rather than trying to have control over external factors and change things outside of ourselves, to change our mindset and our heart, to be better able to cope with difficult circumstances.
And to change the world for the good.
Which is
because
just what I'm going to ask about, because this has come up quite a lot in various Buddhist places and circles I've attended or gone to, people ask the same questions. If movements like feminism and the gay rights movement and the civil rights movement in America hadn't gone out and challenged their oppressors and their oppression, we wouldn't be where we are. We wouldn't have made the progress we've made today with more liberal attitudes and acceptance towards diversity. And we might still be stuck in old Victorian, if you like, oppressive structures.
Yes, that's true in a way, but I think the thing is that to make a positive change in the world, one that people really will grow by, we need to act with kindness. That is the crucial thing. In fact, as we're interdependent beings, if we make a change here, we immediately make a change in the world around us. As I said, when we should look for evidence that we're changing, we look at how we are in the relationship with each and every person we encounter. And so, if, for instance, we meet somebody who's obsessed at that moment with some kind of problem that they've been afflicted by, sometimes just our very kindness can remind them of their own capacity for kindness. They then meet another person, and it grows. And I think this, the characteristic and the thing that guarantees change is going to be positive, is this engagement from the heart. Beyond that, I cannot say, but I think that's the crucial thing, that to say we need to change from the heart, precisely as we're interdependent, that change here will make a change outside. So it's not an either or, but it certainly is. It certainly is this, I think, that Dharma is saying, that if we don't work here, what we do outside, even if it comes from intellectually good ideas, will probably provoke chaos, resentment, and hatred, as we so often see. So it's not an either or. We don't have to sign up for either or, precisely because say the fundamental reality of the world for Dharma is interdependence.
Can I have some question?
Last half a question.
Probably the answer will be shorter than the question. But I was just wondering. So where you were talking about this cross, this encrustments around our Buddha natures.
Yeah.
And they can be like cultural things, like traumas, like experiences we had.
Yeah.
And so does that mean that if we do things like for example, going to like psychotherapy or hypnosis or things like that maybe help us to see past our traumas so is it possible that these things can get us, well, not to the Buddha nature, but closer to the Buddha nature?
I don't want to rule out anything. I mean, actually, just falling in love with somebody can help you. Or with the wrong person can hinder you. So I'm very serious. I mean that of course we think for the core transformation that spiritual practice is necessary. But for some people, going into an art gallery and seeing some extraordinary representation of beauty can unlock something, can heal something. So we're not. I think the Dhamma approach is to be pragmatic, and whatever helps, we should rejoice in. Yeah. So I think we should, yes, we have to end here. So I'll just recite a short verse, dedicating any goodness we've made through our discussions to the benefit of all beings. Sunandi taji zikbani tubi nepe dranam panchane chiganachi bala dupai sipi sole drowa shu. Okay, so I wish everybody a beautiful summer and good luck with all spiritual practice. Okay.